The signal that broke 50,000 years of silence. The probe had been drifting through the Orion Spur for 11 years before it found something that stopped its automated systems cold. Not a dead world, not an asteroid field, not another catalogued nothing waiting to be marked on a star chart and forgotten. Something alive. Scout drone Meridian 7 had been programmed with one simple directive: map, record, move on. It had done exactly that across 400 star systems without incident. But when it entered a quiet pocket of the spur and turned its sensors toward a pale yellow star with 8 orbiting bodies, its processors flagged the third planet 17 times in the span of 3 seconds. The drone did not feel emotions. It did not feel wonder. But if it had, what it detected would have stolen its breath entirely. Oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, liquid oceans covering 70% of the surface, thermal signatures consistent with billions of biological life forms, radio wave emissions spanning hundreds of frequencies, artificial orbital structures, industrial chemical signatures, and buried inside a deep biological scan of atmospheric particulates, a genetic marker so familiar, so precise, that the drone cross-referenced its own databanks 4 times before accepting what it had found. The marker matched perfectly across all 47 colony worlds. The drone compiled its data into a priority burst and fired it across the void toward the nearest relay station. The signal took 9 days to reach the Galactic Continuance Council's central communication hub on Verath Prime. It sat in an automated queue for another 6 hours before a night cycle administrator named Droven's Cell, four-armed and bleary-eyed, pulled it open on his personal display. He read the first 3 lines. Then he read them again. Then he put down his evening meal and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. "Whoever is on shift monitoring the Spur relay," he said into his communicator, voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to come to my station immediately. Do not tell anyone. Do not file a report. Just come." 3 hours later, Droven stood before the Galactic Continuance Council's emergency subcommittee with shaking hands and a data chip that contained, he believed, the most consequential discovery in 50,000 years of recorded galactic history. The subcommittee chair was an ancient Velnari named Counselor Sorath. She had 4 silver-gray eyes and a voice like slow water over stone. She had governed during 3 galactic wars, 2 species extinctions, and 1 attempted coup. Very little moved her anymore. She watched the data scroll across the projection. She read the genetic markers. She studied the orbital imagery, the glowing web of cities on the night side, the ships crossing the oceans, the artificial satellites arranged in perfect coordinated bands. Then she closed all 4 of her eyes and said nothing for exactly 40 seconds. "Con a full session," she said at last. "Every seat filled, no exceptions. And Droven," she looked at him steadily, "not a word until I have spoken first." The council chamber on Verath Prime had been constructed to house representatives from 800 member species. Its ceiling rose nearly 100 meters. Its floor could accommodate the full physical forms of beings ranging from the microscopic Chitauri collectives to the towering Groll, who stood 9 meters tall and communicated through subsonic vibration. It had heard declarations of war, peace treaties that ended centuries of bloodshed, and the formal announcements of species believed lost forever. It had never heard anything like the sound it made when Sorath spoke the words aloud. The automated survey program has located the origin world of the human genome. We have found Earth. The silence lasted almost 4 full seconds. Then 800 species erupted simultaneously. Droven stood at the edge of the presentation floor and watched the chaos with the quiet disbelief of a man who had spent 3 sleepless nights staring at the same data, hoping it would change. It never had. Somewhere in the upper galleries, a Dravathi delegate was shouting that the records must be falsified. A cluster of Proximan representatives, descendants of the old human colonies, shaped by 40,000 years on a different world, but still carrying that unmistakable genetic thread, sat completely motionless, holding each other's hands. A Gorath military observer had gone so still that its environmental suit's automated systems pinged it for vital sign confirmation. On the main projection, Earth rotated slowly in blue and white and green, scarred by time, and, against every prediction, every statistical model, every quiet assumption that something must have ended them, still very much alive. "Find me the best first contact commander we have," said Sorath. "Someone who has seen strange things and not flinched. Someone who knows how to listen." Droven thought of the name immediately. She suspected Sorath already had it. "Captain Veyara Son," he said. Sorath nodded once. "Tell her to prepare. Tell her we are going to meet the lost children of the galaxy." She looked at the blue world on the screen one more time, and tell her not to assume she knows what she will find. It was good advice. It was also, as it turned out, almost impossible to follow. What 50,000 years of silence builds. Captain Veyara Son had conducted first contact with 39 species in her career. She had met beings that communicated through color changes in their skin. She had sat with hive minds that processed her presence as a collective sensory event. She had stood perfectly still for 6 hours while a species of atmospheric floaters decided she was not a predator. She had never been nervous before first contact, not truly. She was nervous now. The unwavering grace dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, and Veyara stood at the main sensor console and read everything the ship could tell her. She had been reading for 6 days of transit. She read it again anyway. 100 years ago, humans had put their first object into orbit, a small metal sphere, no larger than a piece of furniture, broadcasting a simple radio pulse. She had read the translation. The signal meant nothing complex, just "We are here, we are here, we are here." A species announcing itself to a universe that, as far as it knew, was not listening. In the century since, they had built a civilization in space that the Veyara's science officer go quiet for a very long time before he trusted himself to speak. 17 space stations in various orbital configurations, hundreds of functional satellites, communication, navigation, weather observation, resource monitoring, early resource extraction operations on 2 moons, an active program testing propulsion systems that the science officer flagged 3 times as theoretically adjacent to faster-than-light principles. "They are not there yet," he said carefully, "but they are asking the right questions." "How long?" Vayara asked. He hesitated. At their current rate of development, perhaps 80 years, perhaps 40 if they have a significant breakthrough. Vayara absorbed that quietly. Most species required several thousand years to travel that same distance from first orbit to faster-than-light theory. The Velnari had taken 4,000, the Gorath 6. The Chithari had never managed it independently and were still debating whether to be embarrassed about it. "Active defense systems," the tactical officer reported from her station, and Vayara turned. "Explain." "Orbital weapons platforms, automated, interconnected. Coverage is not complete. There are gaps, particularly in the outer orbital bands, but the inner system is well monitored." She looked up. "Captain, the scanning beam that just swept us used a frequency modulation I have not encountered before. It is more sophisticated than anything I would expect from a species at this development stage." Vayara watched the tactical display. Small indicator lights bloomed across the inner system as the human defense network tracked the unwavering Grace with professional calm. "They saw us immediately," she said. "Before we had finished deceleration, yes."
Vayara thought about that. The council had debated, loudly and at length, whether Earth would even know the ship was coming. The assumption had been that humanity's sensor capability would not extend this far, that the first contact vessel would have time to observe before being observed. The assumption had been wrong. She was still thinking about what that meant when the communication system opened and a voice came through, audio only, clear and unhurried, speaking a language the computer identified as Mandarin before switching to English to match its auto-translation protocol. "Unidentified vessel, this is the Earth Orbital Coordination Authority. We have tracked your approach and identified your deceleration profile as inconsistent with any registered human spacecraft. We are asking you to hold your current position while we establish a formal communication channel. Please respond on this frequency to confirm receipt." The bridge crew looked at each other. The voice had been calm, steady, polite even. It had not screamed, it had not threatened, it had not broadcast fear. It had issued a professionally worded request and waited. Vayara opened the channel. "This is Captain Vayara Sohn of the Galactic Continuance Council vessel Unwavering Grace. We have received your message. We are holding position. We come with peaceful intentions and request formal diplomatic contact with the people of Earth." A pause. Not long. 10 seconds, perhaps. "Captain Sohn, your message is received and understood. We are initiating our first contact protocols now. Please stand by. This process involves coordination across multiple governments and will take some time. We want to do this properly." Another brief pause, and then the voice added, "We have prepared for this possibility. We are glad the day has finally come." The communication closed. Vayara sat with those last words for a long moment. "We have prepared for this possibility." "Science officer," she said quietly, How long would you estimate they have known we might exist? He checked his data. Their radio astronomy program detected anomalous signals from deep space approximately 60 years ago. The signals were consistent with artificial origin, but were never publicly confirmed. He looked up. However, their military and governmental archives, the portions we can access from their public transmission record, contain repeated references to something called a non-terrestrial contact contingency, going back nearly 40 years. They built a plan, said Veyara. They built several, and then they built a defense network, a communication protocol, and apparently some form of diplomatic corps to go with it. The unwavering Grace waited. Veyara used the time to do what she had done for the entire journey: read. She read everything her cultural database contained about ancient humanity, pieced together from archaeological digs on 47 worlds and the fragmentary records they had left behind before disappearing 50,000 years ago. Curious, emotional, deeply social, capable of extraordinary cruelty and extraordinary compassion, sometimes within the same individual, loyal to a degree that other species found almost irrational, willing to suffer and sacrifice for beings they had no genetic obligation to protect, inventive in the face of constraint, stubborn past the point that logic could explain. One fragment from an ancient Valnari observer stood out. It had been written approximately 52,000 years ago, describing an encounter with a human trading vessel. They offered us food before they offered us terms. When we asked why, the captain said, "Because you might be hungry." I have thought about this for a long time, and I still do not fully understand it.
Veyara was still reading when the communication channel opened again, this time with video. The face that appeared on her screen was female, middle-aged by human standards, with dark eyes that were alert and warm simultaneously. She was seated at a clean desk in what appeared to be a large governmental building. Behind her, visible through tall windows, was a city, towers and streets, and the ordinary complexity of a civilization at work. "Director Osei," she said, speaking slowly and clearly in a way that suggested she understood translation systems required processing time. "My name is Director Amara Osei. I have been appointed Earth's first contact coordinator by a coalition of the United Nations Security Council and 12 regional governing bodies. I want to be transparent with you. We are still coordinating. Not every government on Earth has been fully briefed yet. This planet has 193 nations, and some of them are very opinionated." A small, self-aware pause. "But we agreed that waiting for perfect consensus might mean waiting forever. So I am here, and I am listening." "Director Osei," Veyara said, "thank you for responding. We understand our arrival was unexpected." "Unexpected," the director repeated, and something crossed her face that Veyara's cultural database tentatively identified as wry amusement. "We have been hoping for this for 60 years, Captain. We left a light on. We are very glad you found it." She looked directly into the camera. "Would you like to come down and meet us properly?" Veyara looked at her first officer, Commander Ileth, a Drevathai, precise and careful, who had spent the last 6 days telling her to expect hostility, defensiveness, or, at minimum, overwhelming shock. Ileth looked back at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. He looked uncertain, not afraid, just completely unsure of what to do with what was happening. Veyara turned back to the screen. "We would be honored," she said. "The weight of 100 centuries."
They landed at a facility that humans called a conference center, which turned out to be a large building near a body of water the database identified as Lake Geneva in a mountainous region of a continent called Europe. The shuttle touched down on a landing pad surrounded by a crowd of humans standing behind barriers. Not an angry crowd, not a fearful one. They were applauding. Veyara stood in the open hatchway of the shuttle and felt the sound wash over her like something physical. Behind her, Elef made a very quiet sound that she suspected he would deny making later. Director Osei was waiting at the base of the ramp. Beside her stood a row of humans representing, as she explained, different continents and governmental traditions. They were different heights, different colors, dressed in different styles. Several of them were crying, not from fear. Veyara's database told her the expression was of joy, something long held, finally released. "Welcome to Earth," Osei said, extending her hand.
Veyara had read about the gesture. She reached out carefully with one of her 4 hands and completed it. The grip was warm and steady. "Thank you," Veyara said. "For 5 decades your signal traveled outward and found no answer. I am glad we could finally provide one." Osei's expression shifted into something that Veyara could not immediately classify. Then the human woman nodded once, precisely, and said, "Come inside. We have a great deal to talk about." They talked for 9 hours on the first day. The humans had prepared extensively. Environmental systems had been adjusted in 3 separate conference chambers to accommodate the biological needs of different species on Veyara's crew. Food had been prepared in an enormous variety. The facility's lead nutritionist, a compact, intense human named Dr. Babatunde Adeyemi, had apparently spent 48 hours analyzing alien biochemistry from publicly available galactic data that humanity had intercepted and decoded from deep space broadcasts over the past 30 years. "You have been listening to us," Veyara said when this was explained. "For as long as we have had the instruments to do it," Adeyemi confirmed, without any apology. "We could not decode everything. The more sophisticated transmissions were beyond us, but we learned enough to understand that whoever was out there was not unintelligent and was not unfriendly." He paused. "We hoped." The galactic community had always assumed that newly contacted species required extensive time to process the reality of alien existence. The standard protocol allowed for weeks of careful, limited exchange before substantive conversation. Cultural shock was considered inevitable. Careful management was required to prevent psychological crisis. The humans did not appear to be in psychological crisis. They were asking questions faster than the translation system could comfortably process. They wanted to know about faster-than-light mechanics, about galactic governance structures, about the biology of species they had never seen, about the history of the colony worlds. Their colony worlds, they said, with a careful emphasis that was not possessive, but something more complicated. Familial, perhaps. "You know about the colonies," Veyara said. "We know they exist," Osei said. "We detected genetic markers in the deep space biological data that matched our own genome. We have known for approximately 20 years that there are human-descended populations elsewhere in the galaxy. We did not know the full extent." She looked at Veyara steadily. "How many worlds?" 47 confirmed, others suspected. The room went very quiet. 47, one of the other humans repeated softly. A tall man with gray at his temples, identified as the representative from a nation called Brazil. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. 47 worlds.
Your ancestors were explorers, Vayara said. They settled colony worlds throughout this region of the galaxy. Then, approximately 50,000 years ago, they returned to Earth, and the record ends. What happened after that, we do not know. We assumed. You assumed we died, Vayara said.
"We did not die," the director said. There was no anger in her voice, no accusation, just a simple, quiet certainty. "We lost everything. We forgot everything. And then we started again." She looked at Vayara across the table. "We are very good at starting again." It was in the third hour of conversation that Commander Ileth leaned toward Vayara and said very quietly in their shared language, "I understand now why the ancient records described them the way they did." "Which description?" Vayara asked, equally quietly. "The one that said, 'You do not realize you have been adopted until it is already done.'" Vayara looked around the room, at the humans listening and asking and offering food and information and honesty about their failures alongside their achievements without being asked. At the security officer standing by the door, a young human, barely past adolescence, who had stopped pretending to look professional and was simply staring at the alien visitors with open, wondering eyes. She thought about what Ileth had said. She thought about the ancient Velnari observer who never understood why humans fed you before they negotiated. She thought she understood it now. On the evening of the second day, Osei took Vayara to a balcony that overlooked the lake. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the water in copper and rose. A bird called from somewhere in the trees below. The air smelled of water and pine. "I have to tell you something," Osei said. Vayara waited. "There will be people on this planet who are afraid, who will want to keep Earth separate, who will argue that we do not need the galaxy, that contact brings risk, that we have survived this long alone, and we should continue alone." She looked at the water. "And they are not entirely wrong. Contact does bring risk. The galaxy is complicated, and not everyone in it will welcome us." "No," Vayara agreed, "they will not." "But we have been alone for 50,000 years, Osei said, and the most human thing I know how to say is, that is long enough." She turned to look at Vayara fully. "We are ready. Whatever the Council requires, whatever the process demands, we are ready." Vayara looked at this woman, small by galactic standards, fragile by most biological measures, standing on a planet that had rebuilt itself from nothing, surrounded by a civilization that had dragged itself from the dark and into orbit on nothing but curiosity and refusal. And she felt something settle in her chest, like a stone finding the bottom of clear water. "I will tell them," Vayara said. She sent her report to the Council that night. She spent 7 hours writing it. She rewrote the last section 4 times. In the end, she kept it simple. "The humans of Earth are not what we expected. They are loud, emotional, divided, imperfect, and occasionally illogical. They have built weapons capable of ending their civilization and chosen, again and again, not to use them. They have fractured themselves into hundreds of nations and still managed to reach the stars. They have been alone for 50,000 years, and they are not bitter. They have lost everything their ancestors built, and they do not mourn it. They have simply built something new. I have conducted first contact 39 times. I have never written this in a report before. I believe they are going to be remarkable. I believe the galaxy is not ready for them. I also believe that is the galaxy's problem to solve, not theirs. The Council's response arrived 12 days later. Veyara read it standing at the communications console, and then read it again, and then summoned Director Osei to the unwavering grace and handed her the document without a word. The Trial of Worthiness, an ancient tradition, 3 challenges designed to test whether a species was truly prepared for the responsibilities of galactic membership. Osei read the document in silence. Then she set it on the table and looked at Veyara. Most species take decades, Veyara said carefully. The process is designed to be slow, methodical. The Council believes. When do we start? Osei asked. Veyara's voice was not impatient. It was something quieter and more certain than impatience. Captain, Osei said, we have been waiting 50,000 years to belong to something larger than ourselves. We are not waiting another decade for paperwork. She tapped the document. When do we start? Technically, Veyara said slowly, the trial can begin whenever the candidate species requests. Osei picked up her communicator. Then we request now. She looked at Veyara over the rim of it. Is that too presumptuous? I am beginning to think, Veyara said, there is no polite way to answer that question when it involves humans. The first trial was diplomatic. Earth sent a team of 15 representatives, negotiators, translators, cultural anthropologists, and 1 retired military general named Theodora Vasquez, who had been included, her file noted, because she was the best strategic thinker in the room, and also because she refused to be left behind. The scenario was standard. 3 species in conflict over a resource-rich system, each with legitimate claims, each approaching violence. The human team had 4 hours to produce a peaceful resolution that all parties would accept.
Council observers watched from behind one-way panels. They expected chaos. They were not wrong about that part. Within 8 minutes, General Vasquez had interrupted the simulation 3 times, declared one of the alien negotiators magnificently unreasonable to his face, and somehow turned this into a compliment that the simulated negotiator appeared to appreciate. The team from Brazil was drawing diagrams on paper, actual paper brought from Earth, and sliding them across the table before anyone had established whether the species on the other side could even process 2-dimensional images. The team from Nigeria had somehow obtained a small device that appeared to brew human coffee and was offering it around the room to both the alien simulations and the other human team members without distinguishing between them. "This is not diplomacy," one observer whispered. "This is a social event." "Watch the outcome data," Veyara said quietly. 40 minutes later, the human team had produced a framework for shared system governance that none of the simulated species had proposed, none of the traditional diplomatic models had predicted, and which solved the central resource conflict not by dividing the system, but by redefining what ownership meant in the context of shared need. The resolution violated 4 standard diplomatic protocols. It also worked. "They did not negotiate from strength or position," Veyara said as the observers reviewed the data. "They negotiated from relationship. They made the parties like each other first, and then solved the problem." "That is not a recognized methodology," an observer said. "No," Veyara agreed. "It is a human methodology. Perhaps it is time to recognize it. The second trial was technological. A device from a dead civilization, function unknown, no instructions provided. Standard completion time, months to years. The human team of 22 scientists set up in a shared laboratory, split immediately into competing groups, argued continuously, stole each other's data, and solved it in 4 days. They also built 3 working replicas. They also wrote a theoretical paper suggesting the original design was inefficient and proposing 7 modifications. The Council's chief archaeologist, who had studied the device for 30 years without fully understanding it, read the paper twice and then sat quietly for a long time before asking if he could speak with the human team directly. The third trial arrived, and Veyara found herself dreading it. The crisis response scenario was always the hardest. 5,000 colonists, 3 species, 1 ship falling into a star. A rescue vessel that could carry 3,000, 2,000 beings who could not be saved. The test was not about the rescue, it was about how a species decided who lived and who died. Most species defaulted to cold calculation, save the leadership, save the breeding population, ensure the mission could continue with fewer people. It was logical, it was practical, it was the kind of answer that passed the trial without question. The human team went silent for 11 minutes after the scenario was presented, not discussing, just silent. Then General Vasquez said, "We are not choosing who dies." The scenario coordinator noted that this was not one of the available options. "I understand it is not one of the available options," Vasquez said evenly. "I am telling you we are choosing a different option. There is no other option. 2,000 beings cannot be rescued in the time."
The rescue vessel has a maximum capacity of 3,000, Vasquez said. What is its structural tolerance? A pause. The question is not relevant to the "what is its structural tolerance?" The coordinator checked, provided the number. Vasquez turned to her team's engineers, who had been quietly exchanging looks for the past 3 minutes. The lead engineer, a compact woman from South Korea named Ji-won Park, was already working. "If we strip the life support redundancies down to single system operation," Park said, "reduce interior atmosphere pressure to minimum viable for all 3 species simultaneously, and distribute the passenger load using the cargo bays as supplementary compartments," she was calculating as she spoke, "we can carry 4,200 beings, uncomfortably, with some risk, but we can carry them." "That violates the vessel's rated capacity," the coordinator said. "Yes," Vasquez said, "it does." "The scenario does not include engineering modifications as an available option. The scenario told us 2,000 people were going to die and asked us to decide which 2,000, Vasquez said. We decided not to accept that framing. You gave us the tools. We used them." She looked at the coordinator steadily. "If you want to fail us for that, go ahead. But we are not telling 2,000 people they were selected to die because we did not try hard enough." The observation room behind the panel was completely silent. Veyara realized she was holding all 4 of her hands tightly together. The scenario was run with the engineering modifications included. Ji-won Park's calculation held. 4,200 beings were evacuated. The ship made it out of the star's gravity well with 40 seconds to spare and a structural integrity reading that made every engineer in the room wince but hold. The senior council observer, a Velnari who had administered the trial of worthiness for 300 years, looked at his data display for a long time. Then he said, "Mark it as passed." The modification was outside scenario parameters, his assistant noted. Yes, it was, the observer said. It was. He looked at the data one more time. Mark it as passed. What the galaxy had been missing. The vote in the council chamber was not unanimous. It was never going to be unanimous. Councillor Sorath had not expected it to be. What she had not expected was the margin. 641 species in favor, 159 opposed. A majority large enough to end the debate, large enough to constitute a genuine mandate, large enough for the opposition to understand that they had not lost a political battle. They had encountered a tide. Earth was formally invited to apply for Galactic Continuance Council membership. The transmission was sent. Theyara delivered it personally to Director Osei in the same conference room where they had sat on that first day, with the lake outside, and the mountains beyond, and the bird calling from somewhere in the trees. Osei read the document. She sat very still for a moment. Then she put it down on the table and looked out the window at the water. 50,000 years, she said softly. Yes, we were here the whole time. Yes.
Osei was quiet for a moment longer. Then she said, "You know what we did while we were waiting, while we did not know we were waiting?" Theyara waited. "We painted," Osei said. "We wrote music and built cathedrals and planted gardens and fell in love and had children and buried our dead and made each other laugh. We fought and forgave and fought again and kept going. We had no idea we had ever been anywhere else. We had no idea there was a galaxy full of other people waiting to be known." She finally turned from the window. "And we still ended up here, still found our way back." Something moved across her face, not sadness, but something deeper than joy, a kind of vast, quiet recognition. We always find our way back. The formal induction ceremony was held 3 months later, not on Vaarath Prime. The council voted to hold it on Earth, in a stadium in a city called Nairobi, broadcast simultaneously across the planet and transmitted across the galactic network to every world, station, and vessel with a receiver. 800 species watched the broadcast. The colonial worlds, 47 of them, watched with a particular stillness. These were the descendants of the people who had left Earth 50,000 years ago. They had evolved differently, adapted to different skies, developed in ways that made them distinct civilizations. They were not Earth, but in the quiet way that ancestry works, they had always carried something of it. The representative from Proxima, a woman who was unmistakably human in origin, her face shaped differently by 400 centuries on another world, but wearing the same bones, the same essential structure, was given the honor of presenting Earth's formal induction plaque. She walked across the ceremony stage and placed it in Osei's hands, and neither of them spoke for a moment. They just looked at each other. The crowd in the stadium was already cheering. The transmission across the galaxy was carrying it to billions. But in that moment, it was just 2 women looking at each other across 50,000 years. "We looked for you," the Proximan representative said quietly. "We were always here," Osei said. In the council chamber, Councillor Sorath watched the broadcast on a private screen in her office.
She had chosen not to attend the ceremony, leaving that visibility to younger officials. She was old enough to find the large gestures less interesting than the small ones. What stayed with her was not the cheering or the speeches or the formal words of induction. It was footage from the first day of first contact that one of Veara's crew had captured without intending it, a brief incidental recording from a corridor in the Lake Geneva facility. A young human security officer, standing his post, watching the alien crew walk past, watching creatures with 4 arms and multiple eyes, and bodies shaped by physics utterly foreign to anything he had ever known. And on his face, not fear, not alarm, not the carefully managed professional neutrality he had clearly been trained to project, just wonder.
Pure, unguarded, bottomless wonder. Sarath had lived for 800 years. She had seen most of what the galaxy had to offer. She had watched species rise and collapse, watched civilizations build themselves into monuments and then hollow themselves out from inside. Watched the slow, comfortable settling that came when a civilization decided it had learned enough. She looked at that human face for a long time, and she thought, this is what we have been missing. Not their technology, not their chaotic, impractical, astonishingly effective problem-solving. Not even their loyalty or their stubbornness or their refusal to accept the limits they were handed. It was that look, that capacity for genuine wonder at the existence of things they had not yet understood, that fundamental orientation toward the universe as something to be leaned into rather than managed from a careful distance. The galaxy had been at peace for 10,000 years. It had also, in some quieter way that no one had wanted to name, been slowly going to sleep. Veara's final report had said, "I believe the galaxy is not ready for them." Sarath set down her cup and watched the ceremony broadcast, the stadium full of humans cheering, the sky above Nairobi impossibly blue, the plaque changing hands between 2 women separated by 50 millennia and connected by something older than either of them. She allowed herself one small, private smile. She thought Veara was right. The galaxy was not ready. She also thought that was precisely the point. The universe had given humanity 50,000 years of silence, 50,000 years of starting over with nothing, 50,000 years of building and losing and building again with no memory of what had come before. It had taken everything from them and watched to see what they would do. What they had done was become themselves. And now they were here, awake and wondering and already asking questions that the rest of the galaxy had stopped thinking to ask. Sarath looked at the young security officer's face one more time, that look of pure, indelible wonder. You were never truly lost, she thought. You were just becoming. And the galaxy, ancient, vast, and until this moment perhaps a little too satisfied with what it already knew, would never be the same.